today we're going to dive into a topic that's a little bit heavy.
Yeah.
The recent wildfires in LA. I mean, just absolutely devastating. And, our hearts go out to everybody who's been impacted. I mean, we're talking about over 40,000 acres burned,
Right.
27 lives lost, and over 12,000 structures completely destroyed. I mean, it's hard to wrap your head around.
Fathom.
Yeah, so in this deep dive, we're going to unpack the impact, talk about the recovery options, and, what we can learn moving forward.
Yeah, it's truly heartbreaking. And what makes these fires even more frightening is just how quickly they spread. I mean, these dry conditions combined with those powerful Santa Ana winds gusting up to 100 miles per hour.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, it just creates this perfect storm for infernos.
It's like a nightmare scenario. And, the financial fallout is it's staggering. JP Morgan is predicting over $20 billion in insured losses.
Yeah.
Potentially the highest in U.S. history. And the total economic impact could reach $50 billion.
Yeah, no, it's important to understand that these events aren't isolated incidents.
Yeah.
This level of destruction really points to a larger trend, the increasing risk of wildfires due to climate change, drier conditions, hotter temperatures. All of this contributes to making these fires more frequent and more intense.
Absolutely. And, we're seeing this impact on a massive scale. But I think what's really surprising is how hard Hollywood specifically has been hit. Over 9,000 buildings destroyed there, 24 lives lost in that area alone. Yeah. I mean, imagine the disruption to everything film and TV production, premieres, not to mention the impact on people's lives.
Yeah.
Celebrities included.
Absolutely. I mean, the ripple effects throughout the entire entertainment industry are enormous. Productions are thrown into chaos.
Yeah.
Premieres are canceled. And then there's the personal toll on those who've lost their homes and their livelihoods. It's a stark reminder that these disasters don't discriminate.
They really don't. And I'm thinking about the people who have been directly impacted, and I imagine the fear and uncertainty are just overwhelming. So let's get practical. For someone whose home has been affected by these fires, what are the crucial first steps they need to take?
Well, first and foremost, safety has to be the top priority.
Of course.
It's crucial to follow evacuation orders and not return until authorities deem it's safe to go back. Yeah. And once it is safe to go back, that's when you start documenting everything.
Yeah.
Take photos and videos of the damage.
Yeah.
Make detailed lists of what's been lost or damaged.
Right.
This documentation is going to be essential for insurance claims.
Okay.
Speaking of insurance. Notify your insurance company immediately.
Okay.
The sooner you get that process started, the better.
That makes perfect sense. But in a situation like this, the damage can feel so overwhelming. Where do you even begin with insurance?
I understand that feeling, but when you file a claim, you'll need to gather all the necessary documentation, proof of ownership receipts for lost items, those photos and videos we talked about. And if you find yourself needing immediate funds for essentials, don't hesitate to ask your insurance company for an advance payment.
Okay, so you filed a claim, you're working with your insurance company, but what about the people who, for whatever reason, aren't covered by insurance? I mean, that seems like the worst case scenario.
It's definitely a difficult situation.
Yeah.
But even then, there's still hope. FEMA Disaster Assistance offers grants.
Okay.
Not loans, for temporary housing repairs and other essential needs.
Okay.
The Small Business Administration, or SBA, also provides low-interest loans for homeowners and renters. And don't forget about the potential support from state and local programs, which can offer additional aid.
Right.
A fantastic resource for navigating all of this is disasterassistance.gov.
Oh.
It's a central hub with information about all of these programs.
That's really good to know those grants. Especially, it can be a lifeline for those who are hit the hardest.
Absolutely. And it's all about layering those different programs, finding every bit of support available to help people bridge that gap.
So let's say someone has secured some assistance. What does the actual rebuilding process look like? Where do they even begin?
Well, initially, most people will need to find temporary housing solutions.
Yeah.
This might involve FEMA trailers, rental assistance, things like that. FEMA assistance usually covers up to 18 months.
Okay.
And in exceptional cases, it can even be extended.
That brings up another question. What if those programs run out before someone is truly back on their feet?
Right.
What if there are delays or gaps in the assistance they're receiving?
That's a very valid concern, and it's where proactivity is so important. Explore all potential overlapping programs.
Right.
Stay in regular communication with authorities, and don't underestimate the power of community support.
Okay, here's where things get a little interesting amidst all this devastation. Could there be a silver lining?
Yeah.
Is there an opportunity to not just rebuild, but to rebuild smarter, to create homes that are more resistant to future fires?
That's a crucial question. Rebuilding really offers a chance to incorporate fire-resistant materials and create what's called defensible space around properties.
Hold on, defensible space. What does that mean exactly? Can you break that down for our listener?
Sure. It's essentially about creating a buffer zone around your home.
Okay.
Imagine a protective bubble, free of anything that could easily catch fire.
Yeah.
You achieve this by clearing away dry brush,
Okay.
keeping trees trimmed back from the house, and choosing fire-resistant landscaping.
So it's all about being proactive, taking steps to minimize the risk before a fire even has a chance to take hold.
Precisely. And when it comes to rebuilding, using fire-resistant materials like metal for your roof, siding, even your decking can make a world of difference.
Let's walk through some potential scenarios that our listener might be facing right now. What if they need to apply to multiple programs at once, like FEMA, SBA, and maybe even some state and local programs? Or what if they're dealing with insufficient funds? And let's not shy away from the really tough situations. What if their house burned down but they didn't have insurance?
Okay, let's break those down one by one.
Okay.
First, applying to multiple programs is often necessary and even encouraged. Just be aware that you can't receive duplicate benefits for the same expense.
Oh, okay.
For example, if FEMA is covering your temporary housing, a state program might not offer that same benefit, but they could help with rebuilding costs.
So it's like putting together a puzzle,
Yeah,
using different programs to fill in the gaps where needed.
exactly. And if you're facing insufficient funds, don't give up. There are still options. You can appeal decisions, explore crowdfunding platforms like GoFundMe, and tap into local community support networks. Remember, you're not alone in this.
Now, the no insurance scenario, this one feels especially daunting.
It's definitely a more difficult road,
Yeah.
but there are still resources available. Local governments sometimes offer emergency assistance,
Okay.
and nonprofits like the American Red Cross and the Salvation Army can provide immediate relief with things like temporary housing and basic necessities.
So even in the absence of insurance, there are potential lifelines available.
Absolutely. It's all about knowing where to look and being persistent in your search for help. And remember, this is where community support can be absolutely vital. Right? Community support can truly make a difference. It's important to note that even with all these resources, rebuilding without insurance demands resourcefulness.
Yeah.
Exploring low-cost repair options, connecting with volunteer organizations like Habitat for Humanity, and even seeking out rebuilding grants from nonprofits are all avenues worth pursuing.
It sounds like a multi-pronged approach is key in that situation. But let's circle back to those temporary housing programs. You mentioned that FEMA typically provides assistance for up to 18 months. What happens after that 18 months is up? Are people just left to fend for themselves?
Not necessarily. While FEMA assistance can sometimes be extended, it's not always guaranteed. It really depends on the individual homeowner's situation and the overall recovery progress in the affected area.
Okay.
But it's important to remember that temporary housing is just that, temporary. It's meant to bridge the gap to a more permanent solution.
So what do some of those more permanent solutions look like? And how do people navigate that transition from temporary housing to something more long-term?
Well, the two primary options are rebuilding or relocating.
Right.
However, both of those paths come with their own sets of challenges, especially for those without insurance. Rebuilding can be incredibly expensive, and relocating often means starting over in a new community, which can be emotionally and financially draining.
It sounds like one hurdle after another. What advice would you give to someone facing that uncertain future, knowing that temporary housing is coming to an end and they need to figure out that next step?
The most important thing is not to panic.
Right.
Start planning early. Explore all your options, including government-subsidized housing programs, if rebuilding just isn't feasible.
Okay.
And above all, stay connected with FEMA, state agencies, and those nonprofits we talked about. Keep those lines of communication open because they can help you navigate the transition and potentially connect you with additional resources.
That makes a lot of sense. It really highlights how important it is to stay informed and be proactive in a situation like this.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power in these situations. The more informed you are, the better equipped you'll be to make those tough decisions and advocate for yourself.
Okay, let's delve a little deeper into the topic of insurance. We've talked about filing claims and requesting advance payments, but what happens if a claim is denied? Or if the payout isn't enough to cover the actual losses? What recourse do homeowners have in those situations?
That's when things can get a bit tricky.
Yeah.
If a claim is denied or underpaid, you have the right to appeal the insurance company's decision.
Okay.
This involves gathering additional documentation to support your case and presenting it to them for review.
So it's like a second chance to make your case.
Right.
And show why you deserve a different outcome.
Exactly. And if the appeal process doesn't work, you might need to consider legal action. There are attorneys who specialize in insurance disputes, and they can guide you through that process. However, that's definitely a last resort, as it can be a long and potentially costly battle.
It sounds like having a thorough understanding of your insurance policy is absolutely crucial, especially in a disaster-prone area like California.
Absolutely. You need to know exactly what's covered, what's not covered, and what your deductibles are. And if you have any doubts or questions, don't hesitate to reach out to your insurance agent or company for clarification.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about a hypothetical situation. Let's say someone has been diligently following the advice we've been discussing. They've applied to multiple programs, FEMA, SBA, maybe even state and local aid, but it's still not enough. The funds they received just don't cover all their needs. What happens then? Where can they turn for that additional support?
That's a tough spot to be in, but there are still avenues to explore. Remember those nonprofit organizations we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
They often step in to fill the gaps left by government programs. Organizations like the Red Cross, United Way, and even local churches and community groups can offer financial assistance, food, clothing, and other essential items.
So it's like a safety net within a safety net.
Yeah.
Providing support where other resources fall short.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of crowdfunding. Platforms like GoFundMe have helped countless disaster survivors raise funds from friends, family, and even strangers who want to support their recovery. It's a way to tap into the incredible generosity of the human spirit.
It's heartwarming to know that even in the face of such devastation, people are so willing to step up and help those in need. Speaking of community support, let's talk more about the role it plays in the recovery process. We've touched on it a bit already, but I think it's worth emphasizing.
Absolutely. Community support is the glue that holds everything together during and after a disaster. It's neighbors helping neighbors, volunteers donating their time and resources, local businesses offering discounts, or even free services to those affected.
It's a beautiful example of people coming together, showing resilience and proving that even in the darkest of times, there's light to be found.
Exactly. And that sense of community can be a powerful source of healing and hope. It reminds people that they're not alone, that they have a network of support to lean on.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the immediate aftermath of the fires to the long road to recovery. It's a complex and often overwhelming process. But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, the opportunity to rebuild smarter and create more fire-resistant communities.
That's a crucial point. As we rebuild, we have a chance to learn from these tragedies and take steps to mitigate future risks. It starts with individual homeowners making choices like using those fire-resistant materials we discussed and creating defensible space around their properties.
So it's about empowering people to be proactive,
Yeah.
to take ownership of their own safety and resilience.
Precisely. But it goes beyond individual actions. We need to think on a community level as well. This means updating building codes to prioritize fire safety, investing in better wildfire detection and suppression technologies, and even rethinking how we manage our forests and wildlands.
So it's a multifaceted approach, requiring collaboration between individuals, communities, and even government agencies.
Exactly. We need to break down those silos, share knowledge, and work together to create a safer and a more resilient future for everyone.
Well said. This has been an incredibly insightful discussion, but before we go, I want to leave our listener with a final thought. We've talked about recovering from these devastating fires, but what about preventing them in the first place? It feels like we're stuck in this cycle of destruction and rebuilding. Is there a way to break free?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it requires a pretty fundamental shift in our thinking. We can't just react to these wildfires. We need to get ahead of them.
Yeah.
We need to be proactive in preventing them.
Yeah. What would that look like? What are some tangible steps we could take to shift from, reaction to prevention?
Well, for one, we need to invest in better forest management practices.
Okay.
That means reducing fuel loads through things like controlled burns and strategic thinning. We also need to rethink how we develop land, particularly in these fire-prone areas.
Right.
Are we building in the right places? And are we building with fire safety in mind?
It sounds like you're suggesting that we need to acknowledge that we live in a fire-adapted ecosystem.
Yeah.
And learn to coexist with fire in a more sustainable way.
Exactly. I mean, fire is a natural part of these landscapes.
Right.
It's when we suppress it for too long that we create the conditions for these massive catastrophic wildfires.
Yeah.
We need to find a balance working with fire rather than constantly trying to fight against it.
That makes sense, but it also sounds like a huge effort requiring a lot of coordination and collaboration.
It absolutely does. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, and it requires buy-in from everyone, government agencies, landowners, communities, even individual homeowners like you. But the alternative, these increasingly destructive wildfires just isn't sustainable.
Okay, one last scenario for you. Let's say someone's house burned down and they discover they didn't have insurance. We talked about some of the resources that they can tap into, but what about the long term? Rebuilding without insurance seems almost impossible.
It's undoubtedly an uphill battle,
Right?
but not impossible. Remember, Habitat for Humanity.
Yeah.
They specialize in helping families rebuild affordably. And sometimes there are government grants or low-interest loans available specifically for rebuilding after a fire. It's all about researching and knowing where to look.
So even in that worst-case scenario, there's a glimmer of hope.
There's always hope. It might not be easy, and it will take incredible resilience and resourcefulness, but there are paths to recovery. And remember, this is where the strength of a community truly shines. People coming together to support their neighbors, offering a helping hand, a shoulder to cry on, or even just a listening ear that makes all the difference in the world.
That's a powerful reminder. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today exploring the devastating impact of the LA wildfires, the steps you can take if you're affected, and the resources available to help you rebuild. And remember, this conversation doesn't end here. As we move forward, we need to keep asking those tough questions and working together to create a more fire-resilient future for California.
And remember, knowledge is power. Stay informed, stay connected with your community, and never give up hope.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.